You're standing in a courtyard in Rome, holding a halberd taller than you are. You're 19 years old. You've sworn an oath to die, if it comes to that, protecting a man you may never speak to directly. That's the entry-level job inside the Vatican. By the end of this, you'll understand something most people never think about. The smallest country on Earth, smaller than most golf courses, quietly built one of the largest financial networks, and one of the largest intelligence-gathering operations on the entire planet. And almost every rank that made it possible starts exactly where you're standing right now. Vatican City covers less than half a square kilometer. Fewer than 1,000 people hold citizenship. And yet, somewhere inside those walls, decisions ripple outward to over 1 billion Catholics across nearly every country on Earth. To even apply for this job, the Swiss Guard, you need to meet requirements most armies don't bother with. You have to be Swiss. You have to be Catholic. You have to be unmarried, under 30, and taller than 5'8". You need a certificate proving you've completed Swiss military training already, before you even arrive in Rome. Once you're accepted, you swear your oath on May 6th every single year, not a random date. On that day in 1527, a foreign army sacked Rome. 147 Swiss guards died defending the Pope, giving him enough time to escape through a secret passage. Only 42 guards survived. Every recruit since has sworn the same oath on the same date, in the same courtyard where some of those men died. You'll spend the next few years in ceremonial uniforms designed, according to Vatican tradition, in a style linked to Michelangelo. But underneath the colorful stripes, you're trained in modern close protection tactics, firearms and hand-to-hand combat. Tourists photograph you like a costume. You're actually one of the last lines of defense around one of the most protected men on Earth. Your day is nothing like a museum guard's. Shifts rotate around the clock. You stand at entrances most visitors never notice, checking credentials, watching crowds, coordinating with Italian police outside the Vatican's own borders, because your authority technically ends at the walls. Off-duty, you live inside Vatican City itself, in barracks a short walk from the Apostolic Palace. You're paid modestly by Swiss standards, but housing, meals, and healthcare are covered. Most guards serve 2 to 5 years before returning to civilian life in Switzerland, carrying a line on their resume that very few people on Earth can claim. Move away from the guard, and up a completely different ladder, and you meet the men training for the priesthood itself. You enter a seminary in your late teens or 20s. Years of theology, philosophy, and Latin stretch ahead of you before ordination. The training typically runs 6 to 8 years, longer than most graduate degrees. You'll study scripture in its original languages, church history stretching back 2,000 years, and the precise rules governing everything from the sacraments to canon law. There's no fast track. Bishops overseeing your formation can, and do, ask candidates to leave if they don't believe the calling is genuine. Most seminarians never end up anywhere near Rome. They're training for a small parish somewhere, a single church, a single community, a modest income for the rest of their working life. You'll take vows of obedience to your bishop, and depending on your path, a vow of celibacy that shapes every relationship you'll ever have from this point forward. For most men who take this path, this is the entire career. A parish, a congregation, a modest house next to the church, decades of weddings, funerals, and quiet, largely invisible service. You'll know every family in your community by name. You'll bury people you baptized decades earlier. Your income depends heavily on donations, so in poorer parishes, you might live on very little for your entire working life, while in wealthier ones, the church itself might be worth more than every house on the surrounding streets combined. Almost nobody at this rank ever meets a cardinal, let alone the Pope, and almost none of them expect to. This is the actual, ordinary backbone of the entire institution, invisible from Rome, essential to everyone in the pews. But a small number of priests get noticed. Maybe you're unusually good at administration. Maybe you studied canon law. Maybe a bishop simply likes you. You get named a Monsignor, an honorary title with no real additional power, but a clear signal that someone above you is paying attention. From here, if the right people keep noticing you, you might be named a bishop yourself. Suddenly you're not running one parish. You're overseeing dozens, sometimes hundreds of priests and churches across an entire region. You wear a ring. You carry a staff shaped like a shepherd's crook. The symbolism isn't subtle. You're now responsible for an entire flock, not a single congregation. Bishops report to archbishops. Archbishops oversee entire provinces, sometimes covering multiple countries. And a small number of archbishops, usually the ones running the most significant dioceses in the world, or the ones who've served the Vatican directly for years, get elevated to the rank almost everyone recognizes. Cardinal, you're handed a red hat and red robes, and the color isn't decorative. It represents a willingness, according to church tradition, to shed your own blood for your faith, exactly the way the Swiss guards at the bottom of this ladder swore to do centuries ago. There are only around 120 cardinals young enough to vote for a new pope at any given time. You're now one of the most powerful religious figures on the planet. You're addressed as Your Eminence. You're granted a coat of arms. In official protocol, you outrank most heads of state when visiting a foreign country. And unlike almost every other rank below you, you were personally selected for this position by the Pope himself, which means, in a very real sense, you owe your entire career to one man's decision. But here's the detail that surprises most people. Being a cardinal isn't really about running a parish anymore, it's about running an empire. Some cardinals oversee the Vatican's presence in a single country. Others move to Rome permanently into the Roman Curia, essentially the Vatican's civil service. Inside the Curia, you might run the Secretariat of State, effectively the Vatican's foreign ministry. From here, the Vatican maintains diplomatic relations with more countries than almost any nation on earth, sending and receiving ambassadors, called nuncios, in capital cities across every continent. Officially, this network exists to represent the Church's interests abroad. Unofficially, nuncios have functioned for centuries as some of the best informed diplomats in the world, filing detailed reports back to Rome on political developments most other governments never see coming. A country smaller than a shopping mall runs one of the oldest, quietest intelligence gathering networks in existence, built entirely out of priests in formal dress attending state dinners. Other cardinals oversee specific departments entirely. One might run the office responsible for canonizing saints, reviewing miracle claims with the same scrutiny a courtroom applies to evidence. Another might oversee Catholic education worldwide, or the Church's relationship with other world religions. Each department, called a dicastery, functions almost like a government ministry, complete with its own staff budget and bureaucratic procedures that would feel familiar to anyone who's worked inside a national government. And then there's the rank almost nobody outside the Vatican understands at all, the Institute for the Works of Religion. Most people simply call it the Vatican Bank. Officially, it exists to manage funds for Catholic institutions, dioceses, religious orders, and charities around the world. In practice, for most of the 20th century, it operated with almost no external oversight, no public shareholders, and financial secrecy that even most national governments couldn't match. In 1982, one of the bank's closest business partners, an Italian banker named Roberto Calvi, was found hanging under a bridge in London. His death was initially ruled a suicide. An investigation reopened decades later concluded he had been murdered, in connection with a massive banking collapse and missing funds linked to the Vatican Bank's own president at the time. Officials at the Vatican denied any direct involvement in his death, but the scandal exposed just how much unchecked financial power had quietly accumulated inside an institution most Catholics had never even heard of. Reforms followed, slowly, over decades. Outside audits, new transparency requirements. But for most of its history, this rank operated with a level of secrecy that intelligence agencies would envy. Working inside this institution meant handling accounts for religious orders, foreign bishops, and, according to later investigations at times, individuals with no clear religious purpose at all. You weren't a priest here, and you weren't a cardinal. You were, functionally, a private banker, operating inside the walls of a sovereign state that answered to almost nobody outside its own leadership. At the very top of every single ladder you've climbed so far sits one man, the Pope. He isn't simply the head of a religious organization. He's the absolute sovereign of Vatican City, the smallest recognized country on earth with total legislative, executive, and judicial authority inside its walls. Getting there requires surviving a process almost nobody outside the College of Cardinals ever witnesses directly. When a pope dies or resigns, the eligible cardinals travel to Rome and are sealed inside the Sistine Chapel. The doors are locked. Phones, internet, and outside contact are forbidden. The Latin word used for the process, conclave, literally means, with a key. A cardinals vote in secret multiple times a day until one candidate receives a 2/3 majority. After each unsuccessful round, the ballots are burned with a chemical additive that turns the smoke black, visible to the crowds waiting in St. Peter's Square outside. When a winner is finally chosen, the ballots burn white instead, That single visual signal, smoke rising from a chimney on a 15th century chapel, is how the entire world learns a new pope has been selected, sometimes minutes before anyone officially announces it. Inside the chapel, the new pope is asked a formal question in Latin. Do you accept your election? He answers. He's then asked what name he wishes to take, a symbolic break from his old identity into an entirely new one. Within the hour, he steps out onto the balcony overlooking St. Peter's Square, in front of a crowd that, on a busy conclave day, can number in the hundreds of thousands. The man who walks out onto that balcony now controls everything you've climbed through to get here. The Swiss guards who will die for him if necessary. The global diplomatic network reporting political intelligence from nearly every capital on Earth, and a financial institution capable of moving enormous sums with almost no outside oversight. He also inherits something else. Real estate holdings, art collections, and investment portfolios that have been growing for centuries, some estimates suggesting assets in the billions of dollars. Though the Vatican has never fully disclosed exact figures to the public, the Vatican museums alone hold one of the largest art collections on Earth, accumulated over hundreds of years through commissions, gifts, and acquisitions. Vatican-affiliated entities also hold real estate across Rome and beyond, some of it generating rental income that quietly funds the institution's day-to-day operations. None of this is listed on a public stock exchange. None of it appears in a shareholder report. The closest thing to a financial statement most outsiders ever see is a brief annual summary, released voluntarily, covering only a fraction of what the broader institution actually controls. In September of 1978, a new pope named John Paul I died suddenly, just 33 days after his election. Officials ruled it a heart attack. Conspiracy theories connecting his death to the ongoing Vatican Bank scandal have circulated for decades. No investigation has ever confirmed them. But the fact that so many people found the theory believable says something on its own about just how much unchecked power had quietly built up inside an institution most people still picture as nothing more than robes, incense, and quiet prayer. So think back to where you started. A halberd, a courtyard, and an oath to protect a man you might never personally meet. Every rank above that courtyard controls something the public rarely sees: diplomatic intelligence spanning the globe, financial reserves with almost no outside audit, and, at the very top, the absolute authority of history's smallest sovereign state, run out of a walled compound smaller than most American universities. The tourists outside see marble, art, and colorful uniforms. What they're actually looking at is one of the oldest, quietest power structures still operating anywhere on Earth, built rank by rank, over nearly 2,000 years, and still standing exactly the way it was designed to. If you want the history behind the institutions everyone recognizes but nobody actually understands, subscribe. That's what this channel is.